Okay, we're rolling. July 20th, Celtic Tiger Dad's Summer Fun Lecture Series. You guys are eating breakfast, and I'm going to go ahead and start with a recap on what we were talking about last time, animal locomotion. We're going to recap what we covered last time and then go into part 2 of this topic. So I'll change the date. We've taken a little break, a summer break, I guess. Okay, so last time we talked about how unicellular organisms move, okay, which is pretty interesting. How much complexity these single-celled organisms have is kind of counterintuitive, but they're pretty incredible what they can do. So we talked about all these 3 different types of protozoa: the amoeba, the shape-shifting amorphous amoeba that has the ability to change the shape of its cytoplasm and create these pseudopods and move by extending out these pseudopods, which are like feet, and kind of drag itself along. And it's amorphous because it doesn't have a fixed shape, right? It's always changing its shape. That's what amorphous means. Then we looked at the flagellates, which are kind of like little sperms, like little bitty tadpoles, single-celled tadpoles with these whip-like tails, which is coming from the Latin for whip, flagellum. And then you have the ciliates, which have these, they move with these little tiny hairs that move on the edge of the cell, right at the surface of the cell. They move in coordinated motion, okay? And then we also talked about a slightly more complex multicellular class of organisms called the cephalopods, and those would include squids. Those include squids and octopi, things like that. And they use a simple form of jet propulsion to basically suck water in and then squirt the water out. And it's kind of like a balloon. Remember we talked about, like, if you had a water balloon and you didn't tie it off quite good enough and it slipped out of your hands, it would move just by the force of the water going out one way and the balloon going the other way. And that's the way these cephalopods move. So those are the 3, those are a couple of types of simple animal locomotion for very simple organisms. But we're going to talk today about how vertebrates like ourselves move with skeletons and muscle, skeletal muscle. And we're going to look at our own nervous system as a way to understand how vertebrates move, okay?
Did you check if the jelly bean or the jelly?
Oh yeah, I did check. Jellyfish are not cephalopods. They look similar, but it's a little bit of a case of like convergent evolution. They're actually not. Yeah. They're not related to squid and octopus. Okay. Okay, but hey, did you know when we were in London at the Natural History Museum in London, there was a giant squid in a big vat of formaldehyde, bigger than this room. It was encased in glass, big glass like aquarium full of formaldehyde, and it was as long as this whole room, a giant squid that they found. So there's very big squid, and they didn't even know for sure that those existed until they found that. Okay, so here we go. So we're going to talk about the nervous system, and the nervous system, just to start as a basic overview of what it is. It's a system that relays signals from every part of your body to your brain and to your spinal cord, okay, which is called the central nervous system. But it's basically a system that allows for electrical signals, little tiny electrical current, to transmit a signal that carries with it certain information. So it's a signal. It's kind of like the most analogous thing I could think of to describe it. It's kind of like a computer signal. okay? And it tells your brain information about what your fingers are feeling, what your toes are feeling, okay? And so you have a system of neurons that are called sensory neurons that provide information from a stimulus to your brain. And I'll show you more how this works. But and then from your brain to all of your parts, including your organs and all your parts of your body, the muscles and everything. You have neurons going back the other way that are called motor neurons. Okay, so we're going to break this down. So basically, the nervous system is comprised of two main parts. You'll hear people talk about the central nervous system, which I'm just going to abbreviate as CNS. Hey, CNS. And the CNS is basically, this is my shitty example of drawing a brain with a brain stem. But this is the brain. So it's the central nervous system is the brain stem, and then this goes straight into a spinal cord. So it's just the brain and the spinal cord. That's all we mean. That's all we mean when we're talking about the central nervous system. And basically, that's like the central, command central system. That's the central information processing system that all the nerves feed back into. Okay? And the peripheral nervous system, which we're going to just abbreviate as PNS, is where we're really going to focus our attention today, because that's how we make voluntary movements. That's how reflexes happen. That's how your organs know what to do when, when to focus on digestion or when to focus on fight or flight. That's where you get the knee-jerk reaction, like you're talking. We're going to talk about all that. Okay, so let's look here and break this down. We've got within the peripheral nervous system, guys. Do you guys know what peripheral means? What do you know?
On the side. On
the sides, good. That's like on the edge, right? Peripheral vision is on the edge of your field of vision, right? Peripheral nervous system. What do you think? What do you think that's relating to, Evan? Which the nerves? Okay, the sides, right? So let's just do. We've got a picture of our central nervous system. We're going to do like a real simple diagram. This is like your brain stem, and then you've got your arms, your fingers, right? Your legs and your toes. So, and you've got nerves in your body, in your organs. Okay? So all these nerves, all the way out to your fingers and toes, and all the nerves in your organs and everything, they're all part of the peripheral nervous system, because they're at the edge of your system, okay? And it's the current that flows through your nervous system. It's analogous to the circulatory system, okay? You know how your blood pumps through arteries? Your blood pumps from your heart through arteries to the extremities, right? And it pumps oxygenated blood out through arteries, and then your body uses the oxygen, and the blood is pumped, and the blood circulates back to the heart and the lungs after it's been used up. The deoxygenated blood comes through the veins, right? So the blood vessels go out away from your heart as arteries and come back in as veins, right? Well, the analogous thing for the central nervous system is we have motor neurons which move away from the central nervous system, and sensory neurons feedback into the central nervous system. Okay, that kind of makes sense, right? The way to remember this is, let's say you touch something, you sense the temperature of a hot stove, let's say, right? Well, if it's hot enough, your sensory neurons are going to short circuit your brain, and they're going to do a shortcut straight to your spinal cord, and it's going to send a reflex to pull your hand away, to recoil from the heat if it's hot enough. Or if it's just warm, you'll put your hand on it, and maybe you'll decide, maybe your hands are cold, you decide you want to keep your hands there or whatever.
But you can fight against pulling it away.
A reflex you can't think about. A reflex happens before you think, because that's the purpose of a reflex. It's to protect you. So your reflex will protect you, and you won't have time to think about it. You'll just pull your hand away and then realize that you've pulled your hand away. You won't have time to think about it. And that's a type. This is sensory neurons, okay? Sensory neurons are carrying that signal that, hey, this is hot, this is going to burn you. They're carrying that signal to the central nervous system. But remember, the central nervous system doesn't just include the brain, it includes the spinal cord. And so there's reflex arcs, reflex neural pathways that allow for your sensory neurons to short circuit your brain, or actually bypass your brain, go straight to the spinal cord and trigger that reflex, which is, boom,
But if you think about keeping your hand on it before, you can just stay.
Yes, then you can do it.
Yes, you can. Yeah, you can. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay. So, let me see if I can draw this better. Okay, so here's a good way. Sensory neurons basically go, let's say, from your fingertips. They go from your peripheral nervous system back towards the central nervous system. These are sensory neurons. The motor neurons send a signal from the central nervous system out to the muscles. You understand? These are motor neurons, okay? So, if I told you to raise your hand, Evan, raise your right hand, let's say, and do it. Raise your right hand, asshole. Okay. Okay. So, you raise your right hand. What's happening is you're hearing me give the command, right? And you're processing that in your, a part of your brain called maybe it's called the auditory cortex or whatever, the hearing part of your brain that processes auditory stimulus. You're hearing that command, you're registering what that means, and you're making a voluntary decision to raise your right hand. But this is a very highly coordinated activity. It seems like a very simple thing to do, but you're coordinating, I don't know how many millions of neurons or billions of neurons are coordinated in the process, because you have neurons from your ear to your auditory cortex in your brain that process the command and register and understand it. Then you have motor neurons from your what's called your precentral gyrus, or your motor cortex, basically, is sending a signal from your brain to your right arm, and and then contracting the muscles, all the muscles. Because think about how many muscles you're going like this. I mean, it's just a lot of muscles. It's amazing. It's just more complicated than you think. That's just what I'm trying to say. So that's voluntary motion, and this is part of. I'm going to erase this a little bit so that we can see more. But so you basically understand central and peripheral nervous system, right? So now we're going to break down more what the central nervous system is comprised of. Okay? So, or sorry, what the peripheral nervous system. So we've got two branches of the peripheral nervous system, okay? You got, let's see, the somatic and autonomic. Somatic just means, this is the way I want you to think of this. Somatic and autonomic. Okay? Just think autonomic is kind of a synonym for automatic, right? You don't have to think about it. It's involuntary processes. Okay? Somatic is voluntary movement. If you decide to do something, I'm going to decide to jump as high as I can. I'm going to decide to shoot this basketball. I'm going to decide in a split second, hey, Ruben, that I'm going to swing at this pitch.
Which he never does.
He swings good, and he made a good hit the other day. Two RBIs. Okay, those are all which one? Hey, which type of nervous system? Which type of system is engaged when you make a voluntary action? Evan. Somatic. Good. Voluntary.
Ruben needs to wash his hands.
Why?
Because you touched the seed that was in your mouth, and you put your hands all over it, and you put your hands all over the cup things.
Right. Okay.
You're overreacting.
No,
I
that's
literally
not
did
overreacting.
this.
It's still disgusting.
Okay, so the autonomic is these automatic functions, and this is actually broken down further into basically your sympathetic and parasympathetic. So it kind of gets even more complicated, but so I'm just going to say sympathetic and parasympathetic. This is really not that important, but for our purposes today, because we're talking about movement. But I just want y'all to be aware, just to be exposed to these terms. So within the autonomic system, you've got the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic is fight or flight. You ever heard of that fight or flight?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when do you think you're going to be engaging the sympathetic fight or flight? Huh? When do you think, Evan? When are you going to have to choose on a split second your body? Even, you're not even necessarily registering consciously. But when do you think you're going to need to, huh?
In a near-death situation.
Near-death situation. Let's say a lion's chasing your ass. Okay? Or something like that. Or you had a close call on the freeway with a semi-truck or whatever. I mean, these are fight or flight moments, okay? What happens during fight or flight is your body shuts down all the non-essential systems, all the organ systems that aren't absolutely essential for survival in the moment. They get shut down pretty much. That's like your digestion, okay? Your hunger system and everything. All that you don't feel hungry. You're not digesting food. You're not worried about anything except for preparing yourself, your body, your muscles for quick action.
Pain? What about pain?
And yeah, I think adrenaline and norepinephrine and all that, you're not feeling a lot of pain because you're ready to fight. And when you're ready to fight, you don't feel a lot of pain. I could punch you right in the face. And
Oh my God.
No, if you're really amped up, you don't hardly feel it. Trust me, I've been there a couple times. But so you don't really feel it a lot because you're so amped up. You just. Okay. So what happens is like your heart rate goes up, right? Your mouth gets dry, your heart rate goes up, you kind of get flushed, and your temperature of your skin, rises and all that. Okay, there's just a lot of physiological things, and a lot of hormones like get released, like adrenaline and norepinephrine. So it triggers like the endocrine system, the hormone system gets stimulated. And so that's fight or flight, right? Mm-hmm. Now imagine the opposite situation. Everything's calm, you're at home, you're relaxing, you're eating a big fat pizza, right? You're calm. you're just eating a big fat pizza and you're watching a movie or whatever. You're just relaxed. You're so relaxed. You just got out of the bubble bath. You're having a nice big fat piece of pizza. And you're totally relaxed. This is the parasympathetic. Rest and digest. Rest, digest. Your body will focus on digestion, and you can sleep and do all those things. Rest and digest. Also feeding and breeding. Feed and breed, rest and digest. These are all parasympathetic functions, okay? Or, yeah, parasympathetic. Okay, so that's that. But we're really focused on this here. This part. This is the somatic part of the peripheral nervous system. Somatic voluntary movement. And we already kind of touched on an overview of how this works. But I want to get a little more in detail, and then we're going to end this part, and we're going to move into this week's questions, okay? Which you talked about, you want to do life expectancy, but that'll be the next lecture. Okay, all right, so a couple of things for the somatic. You have the central processing unit, so to speak, if you want to use like the computer analogy. The central processing unit of the somatic nervous system is called the precentral gyrus. And it's also, hey, guys, pay attention. I'm not even making you take notes today. So
Evan
you guys,
keeps telling me to wash my hands.
Evan, who cares? Why do you care?
Because, oh my God.
Just who cares? Just leave them alone. Precentral gyrus is also known as, because that's kind of a mouthful, so people say it's just the motor cortex. It's the central primary motor cortex in your brain. And so what it does is it basically receives all the sensory inputs, the sensory signals from your sensory neurons, and it sends out a motor signal to the peripheral nervous system through the motor neurons network, okay? So this is like the central processing, unit, okay? Now, like we said, reflexes have their own neural pathways that don't involve the precentral gyrus. They go straight to the spinal cord, and it's just really quick, and it's not even a thought. And that's the knee-jerk reaction, when they hit your knee under your knee with a rubber mallet or whatever at the doctor's office. That's an example of one of these reflexes.
Wait, why does it work with the rubber mallet, but whenever I just do
It doesn't matter what you hit it with, but it's just, I don't think you can really do it to yourself that easily.
Yeah.
Oh.
You probably have to, just because you're kind of thinking about it, maybe. I don't know. But you might be able to do it yourself, I don't know. Okay, so we talked about knee jerk, we talked about removing your hand from a hot stove. Can y'all think of another reflex, just kind of for fun?
If you step on a Lego.
If you step on a Lego. That's a good one, actually. Step on a Lego and you go like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like if you're playing ping pong, you kind of think about like.
Right. If you're playing a sport, a lot of reflexes actually probably in sports because you're just reacting, before you can even think about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You think about the objective and then don't think about like.
You don't think about reacting, you just do it, right? So that's a great example. Imagine a pro baseball player that's hitting a 100-mile-an-hour pitch from a pro baseball pitcher. I mean, there's zero time to think. He's having to decide basically the minute the ball leaves the pitcher's hand whether or not it's a ball or a strike, whether or not he's going to swing or take the pitch. So that's a good example. Now, another example. Blinking. Blinking is a good example. You don't really think about blinking, you just do it. Your body does that. One other thing I wanted to mention briefly about the parasympathetic, like rest and digest and stuff, is you do have some control over over this. It's not entirely involuntary. And the main example of this is like peeing and pooping. You can control when you pee and poop, you know. Even though you can feel your body is ready to pee or whatever, you can hold it, you know. So that's kind of an example. Whereas this fight or flight, you're not in control of this. The fight or flight, you're along for the ride basically. Okay, so that's covering that. Now I want to do one last diagram and then we'll close this part of the lecture. We've been going for 25 minutes. So we'll do one more. I want to show you the building blocks of the nervous system and how they're structured. It's pretty incredible how much complexity is built into these single cells, okay? You think, oh, a single cell, how complicated could it be? And you've got cells of all different crazy shapes and all different structures, okay? So I was going to do my best to draw this neuron. Neuron is the basic cell of the nervous system. It's the nerve cell, also known as the nerve cell. So we're going to say, I'm going to draw a neuron, also known as a nerve cell. And it's basically got a nucleus like a normal cell. So call this the nucleus. But around the nucleus, the cytoplasm is kind of shaped kind of like this, right? And make a place for the axon to go out. And at the edge of these nucleus, you have all these little fine branches. This is an example of kind of a space-filling architecture that nature uses a lot, like in trees, branches, okay, capillaries in your circulatory system. So it's got all these branches. These are senses, these are collecting signals, and these are called dendrites. You guys have heard that, right? You ever heard of dendrites?
Maybe.
Dendrites are all these little sensors that receive the signal. Okay? So they're like the receivers of the signal. And then the signal gets processed in the nucleus, and then it goes down this, this is called the axon. Goes down this axon, and finally it goes out to kind of the axon terminus, or you could call this it goes to the synapse. This is the synapse, synaptic clefts, which is just a gap. Synapse. This is a gap between between the end of this nerve and the end of this neuron and the beginning of the next neuron. This is the synapse. So the axon, it has insulation here. This is the myelin sheath. Let's see, myelin sheath that insulates the axon. Basically, it allows the signal to transmit faster, but the signal is transmitting this direction, okay? Signal transmission, this electrical signal. It's electric signal transmission. So it's all moving in this direction, and the next neuron starts here. So this allows the signal to be communicated from neuron to neuron, right? And so it's kind of like the electric wires in your house. It actually carries an electric current, and it's a pretty amazing system, because if one of these neurons gets wiped out,
Stop eating cherries.
he can eat the cherries. You can eat the cherries. We got more cherries. Hey, so if one of these neurons gets wiped out, notice the whole system is not let's see, the whole system is not compromised. If I cut a wire, the whole circuit is broken. Okay, but in this kind of system, because there's so many branches, and each of these axons is feeding into multiple other neurons. If one neuron gets wiped out, then I've got, or two neurons, let's say, I've got these neurons down here to pick up the slack, okay? So this is a very ingenious way to develop redundancy, to build redundancy into the engineering and the architecture of our nervous system, so that it actually is much more flexible, it's much more resilient to shocks. Because imagine in your peripheral nervous system, let's say you got nerves in the very tip of your finger. I cut the tip of my finger off with a freaking sheetrock knife one time. And I guarantee you I severed some nerves. I know I did. I mean, I could feel it. But when you sever that nerve, it'll be maybe numb right here, but it's not going to be numb all the way down your finger. Why? Because the other nerves are picking up the slack. And that's very important. So you have to have this redundancy. And this is how we develop that. So, okay, so that's basically the building blocks of the nervous system. Now we're going to pause the video. I'm going to stop this video and we'll get into the next thing. All right.